more young people so that undocumented LGBTQ young people know how and where to access those housing opportunities too. So recommendations are really that housing options need to be geographically diverse and connected to resources and robust supportive services located within the community. And that we wanted to make a special note here around models where we're trying to provide housing and supportive services in the same location and how that can be really complicated. And so thinking really thoughtfully about how to ensure that if a young person is not a good fit, let's say, for a housing program and can no longer stay in that housing program, that by pushing them out of that housing program doesn't mean that they're no longer able to access things like case management, therapy services, psychiatric services, all of the things that I think make a model like the Broadway Youth Center so important, because it's not connected to housing that evening, and so it continues to be a landing pad for young people who are sometimes moving from housing program to housing program to housing program. We talked about also as it relates to policy, and this was talked about I think a little bit earlier, but that thinking that we need to expand definitions of households, and young people need to be able to self-define who their household is, who their partner is, who their siblings are, and be able to stay with their chosen families, however that is defined by them, and that's really trauma-informed and also really produces important outcomes, and that we need to increase available beds for young people and their self-identified family. And then the last part was really some conversations that happened around making the partial emancipation process more accessible to young people under the age of 18 who are needing emergency housing. And so thinking about what we could do to make that more accessible to housing providers, but also to young people who are under 18. We talked about a lot about the central referral system and the vulnerability index, and a lot of the recommendations were around making sure that there is transparency around the waiting list for young people. So young people want to know where they are on the waiting list so that they can make decisions about their housing steps. We talked about system-wide education and information about the central referral system and its design, including how it's connected to the vulnerability index. So a lot of people are hearing a lot about the index, about the referral system, and want to know on the back end how it's designed and how people are filtered up or filtered out to programs and where they are on the waiting list. And then one of the ideas was that as it relates to vulnerability, that young people who are aging out of youth systems should be accelerated to the top of that list, knowing that their risks are higher because they're going to be pushed out of programs that they're no longer eligible for because of age. And then this is a lot. Again, housing, there's so much to talk about, and so this is a really important part of the work. We need, I think, more data about the number of young people, specifically the number of LGBTQ young people that we're talking about who are in need of services and housing in Chicago, and I think we've got some good plans to get more data around that. We need to think about expanding hours. We need to do more trainings, but then to follow up on those trainings and make sure that we're doing some really important program evaluation on not just LGBT competency, but making sure that programs, when they say they're doing harm reduction housing, they're doing harm reduction housing. When they're talking about trauma-informed services, we know what that means and that there are practical steps on everything that every staff person is doing as it's related to making sure that trauma-informed is a value infused throughout every part of the work. We're talking about positive youth development. It is a philosophy, it is a way of living and breathing the work, and that all of these intersecting frameworks are saving lives every single day and making sure that this is really connected to the LGBTQ competency work that we want to do. Thinking about safety, we talked a lot about security and how housing programs are placed, similar to we talked about the school to prison pipeline, that there are that social services and community centers and healthcare centers can do a better job of ensuring that that their spaces aren't arresting young people before they get to the emergency medical provider. And then we also talked about real-time bed availability. So if there are extra beds in that youth program, service providers need to know, young people need to know, and we need to figure out how to get young people to those available beds. And then, and that's also connected to some of the 311 transport. So if someone calls 311, making sure that if they're a young person, specifically an LGBTQ young person, that they are, taken by Catholic Charities to a youth low threshold shelter or housing program. Are you ready for the revolution? A housing revolution?
Yes.
Okay. Oh my goodness. So housing programs need a whole lot to be successful and high impact. We talked about transit as well. We want creative and artistic outlets. You're going to see an amazing performance from the Youth Empowerment Performance Project. And these are the type of programs and projects that are trauma-informed. They're developing young people as leaders, and they're an employment opportunity for young people. I mean, it's just a genius model. It's amazing. We want access to beauty supplies, self-care supplies, quality clothing, basic needs. We want to feel good in our bodies when we're moving through the world trying to make these resources work for us. And then the last thing is really thinking about, we've talked a little bit about restorative justice and bringing these practices into all of our spaces that are working with anyone who's experiencing homelessness or housing instability. And so really thinking about the practical strategies to prevent violence before it happens, to interrupt it when it's going down, and then to think of strategies and ways to transform the conditions that potentially kicked off that violence in the first part. And really think about it goes back to a lot of the positive youth development and some of the sanctuary model work that I know a lot of practitioners are doing, but really getting wholeheartedly involved in what it means to create spaces that are trauma-informed and informed by this belief that we are all inherently resilient and that we can always draw from our perpetual, undying resilience, and that those are strengths that really can just completely transform the cultures of some of the social services and nonprofits and housing programs that we all work in and love. And now for the Q&A.
Thank you, that was amazing. I wonder why your group was way more popular than mine. Her rooms were always really full. Questions? Comments?
First thing first, there's like two questions. I wanted to know why Host Home was never funded by the government. And my question number 2 is, I told you again, I am more focused about my T community. Where can we place transgenders in a shelter that is really affirming? Because you say you put us in a shelter because our ID says female or our birth certificate says female, then you put us on a women's floor, that can create more of a problem. So we need to work on where we're gonna go as far as dealing with us girls. You know what I'm saying? So that's my 2 questions I just wanted to throw out there.
Could you repeat the first one? I couldn't hear that. I'm not sure if it was heard over here either.
Okay. I was trying to figure out why Host Home was not funded by the government. And my second question is how we're going to better house the trans girls as far as sheltering goes. Because you just can't just place it on the women's floor and just think that's going to be safe.
Any practitioner, anyone would like to?
Well, I think I can maybe speak a little bit about how we need housing programs to really think about why we landed in this place of thinking that it was more safe to have kind of this gender segregation, and how that safety is a lot deeper than that. It's about thinking about a bunch of different factors that are really important. And so it does, I think a huge barrier is programs that are designed for a certain gender, and then there are lots of other folks who have chosen family, for example, who are in that program and want to stay in that program as well, and so some of the barriers around that. And I think that a lot of what we heard loud and clear was the need for housing programs of every single option that are gender affirming, and there's a lot of options and ways for people to live with their chosen families in those housing programs, and however that's defined. And so a lot of it is about self-determination and being able to stay with your family were like the really two huge things that came out of that. And then I think connected to the host home program, I can't speak to some of the funding, but maybe Bond can.
And I think, is David Pfeiffer still here? Like, we can speak to
John.
I'm sorry, David Pfeiffer was my college president. So I just immediately went there. So I can just share to the person that asked that question, we have, Keisha Lee Morris. The UCAN LGBTQ host home program folks, we've been to Washington and back. We've been in front of Mayor Daley. What? I can't hear. You can't hear?
We've been in front of every politician under the sun. Kappelman, we talked with Kappelman about this. We talked, so on the state level, at the city level, and at the federal level, and we even drove literally to DC with youth and myself in a car saying, what is happening? And we asked Brian Samuels face to face. And that was the longest 13 hours of my life and back. But the answer is simply this: we don't fit neatly within the current request for proposals. There's also an issue of liability that I heard at the city level. You know, we've never done this before. So there are several layers, but in a nutshell, everyone says that we don't fit neatly into their funding scopes. Additionally, with private foundations, you know, there is a love affair for just a couple years, and a lot of times when kind of leadership turns at foundations or funding streams, they break up with us. And unfortunately, we were broken up with in a love letter from one of our major funders. Not because we weren't knocking our numbers out of the park, because we were. Our average length of stay in host home was 11 months. And Casey, who's a PhD and all this and knows this work and has been doing this work for decades, is 11 months a phenomenal, like average length of stay? It's huge. Our longest length of stay was over 2 years. So it's not because we weren't doing phenomenal things and our young people were not graduating and getting jobs and doing great stuff and connecting with adult allies, but it's just because we fell out of love, or they fell out of love with us. There was something else that came along.
For these housing programs that you want to bring up, and have you guys ever thought about not just bringing counselors and other people that could help, but also advocates that have also been homeless, and maybe they could provide more comfort for the young people and the youth that want to be in the housing program?
I mean, absolutely. We heard that. You know, in terms of from a systems navigation standpoint, if you've had to navigate systems, young people want to talk to those folks always, and so there's a huge need to have folks with life experience in positions of leadership in these organizations and in these projects, but also as ongoing just support, whether it be you identify as a youth worker or a peer-based staff person, that is really, really critical. Loud and clear, absolutely is a best practice.
I just wanted to make a comment, since there's been a lot of talk about trans women. I don't think that there's been much of a voice for trans men, or at least for gender non-conforming people also. I just wanted to bring it up, because I know that black men in general, or black boys, are subject to a lot of discrimination and issues. And as someone who is a black trans masculine identified person. I'm also subjected to those issues as well. So I just wanted to bring that up, and also gender nonconforming people too have those struggles. So
It's a very good point. Thank you.
Did you say some of that?
Can you repeat
I'm sorry.
what you were saying back here?
Sure. In fact, why don't I?
Here.
We're going to have our Oprah moment now. Hold on.
also, before I say my comment again, we have 2 more minutes.
I was wondering if that car was for me or not, or you were just holding it.
Yeah, so what I wanted to say, or what I was saying, was that there isn't much of a voice for trans masculine people, specifically trans masculine people of color, and also gender nonconforming people. And since there's a large statistic for black men of color who are going through similar issues, I think there's a higher chance for people to gloss over trans men of color, and I just wanted to make that comment. I said other things, but I forgot.
Thank you. Yes?
I just wanted to say, when you talk about LGBT and homelessness, there's a very important letter in there, and there's the L. And those are lesbian identified women. And when you talk about homeless LGBTQ, you have to consider our biological children. Because I'm a single parent, I am lesbian identified, and I'm an domestic violence child. That's not a situation that I asked for or hoped for or thought I'd grow up to be. But when you talk about LGBT homeless youth, I consider my first and second grader to be very much that. So when you think about housing, and all of those letters and all of these concerns are very important, but you have to think about, there are some of us who are LGBT identified, and I have a 6 and an 8-year-old. So now we are a part of that homeless circuit as well. And when you talk about housing opportunities and transitional housing, you have to think about those of us who are single parenting in the future.
Right.
Absolutely. Thank you. Because I've been gently informed, we have 2 minutes here and then here.
I've heard a lot in pretty much each presentation, a lot about recruitment for foster homes for the LGBTQ population. And so what I would ask is, I'm DCFS, I'm your community outreach director for the state. Whenever you're having an event, whenever you're doing anything, whatever kind of fairs you're having, if it's Market Street days, if it's whatever, we haven't been invited. So if you contact me, I will come wherever you are, wherever you think that you're going to have people who may be interested in fostering or adopting or mentoring. I will come to try and help with that recruitment effort and get that to our recruiters.
And what would be the best way for those of us who aren't necessarily in the loop to get in contact with you?
Okay, so I have my cards, and of course Tracy and Kim both know how to get in touch with me, but yeah, I have cards with me today, and that's what we do. People don't always know that, but we have to recruit for special populations all the time, so I'd be happy to come out and do that with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think we have one more question here.
It was more of a comment than a question, and actually more of a shout out than a comment. I'm with Project Fair Chicago, and I don't know. So then maybe, I guess, it's not so much of a shout out since lots of people maybe know who we are. But for people who don't know who we are an all grassroots community-led organization who is trying to buy a house to house 5 to 10 homeless LGBTQ young folks. We just finished our second fundraiser after working hard for 2 years, and at the last minute we had an anonymous donation and we're able to get our money. And so we're really excited. We're really, really close to being able to buy a home. We're looking in South Shore and Austin and in East Garfield Park, and our housing team is working so hard to do research in those areas. If you have community allies there, I have lots of cards. We would love to hear about that. If you want to volunteer, May 13th and June 14th, we have a volunteer meet and greet. There'll also be some information. I don't have a date yet, but like a community meet and greet to talk with folks and let people know like where we're at now that we have been doing a lot of research, and now that we have some of the burden taken off funding, that we're looking more at making some more concrete steps. We are not government funded. It's all done by community and probably people in this room who donated money and time and effort. So anyway, come find me if you want to know more about it.
Fantastic. Thank